welcome back. So today, Mr. Dotson is teaching about a couple of different things. And sometimes these are three things that get mixed up. Specifically, when we're talking about color, I want to talk about hue, value, and saturation. All right? Now, the first one, hue, is really just the color you're using. A lot of times I like to use this example of where if you're working in a digital tool, hue is just the colors. It looks like the color wheel, and a lot of times it's stretched out into this big long line, all right? And all of those colors are all of your hues. Now, that's the purest form. That's the color. Hue, color. There it is. Now, value, a lot of times when people talk about value, we usually think about money. And yes, when we talk about art, there is a value attached to art. How much are people charging for it? But when we're talking about the colors, value is really about the shading. Now, to make it lighter, we will normally add white to it. And then to make it darker, you'll normally add black to it. So value is the shading. Value is what gives us a sense of light or dark. So a hue, that color can have different values based on how much white or black you add to it to make it lighter or darker. So hue is the color and value is the shading. So that's the thing that's going to tell you how light or dark it is. And then the last one is saturation. Saturation, that's going to be how vibrant the color is. How true is it to its original color, all right? So if you've got this bluish color that you're looking at, and then you slide it back or you desaturate it, that's taking it closer to grayscale. And when you fully desaturate something, you take all the color out of it, and well, now you're working in grayscale. You're working with black and white. Now, even in black and white, you have different values. You have different shades of gray, and that's okay. But when we're talking about colors, all those colors also have all of those things. How saturated is it? How bright is it? What is the color itself? The hue. And then, what is the value of it? How light or how dark is it? And all of these things, when you combine them, the different saturations, the different colors, and the different values within those colors and the shading that you add, this can add a lot of complexity to your art. It makes it more visually interesting to look at. Or maybe you want to focus on just one of those things to make it more intriguing. Do you want to have different hues, lots of different colors? Or do you want to have the same hue and make it monochromatic? Meaning that one color is used over and over again, but with different values to create some depth and a little distinction between what's in the drawing itself. So even by just using one hue, one color, but having lots of different values, you can still create a very interesting piece of art. I used that display, that color picker that's in a lot of digital tools. That particular one that I showed you is from a free online tool called GIMP. All right. And that was one that I just wanted to show you that tool really quickly. But you can also find it in a lot of photo editing. And then even within a lot of our like phones and cameras, you can do a lot of editing within that app or within the camera itself without having an extra app on the outside. Here they call hue tint. So if you take that slider and you move it one direction, it's going to get more yellowish and green. And if you move the other direction, it's going to go more blue and then eventually red and purple. So that's how you can shift the hue of a whole photograph. And then you'll notice that there's usually a saturation option. How bright do you want those colors to be? How saturated do you want them to be? Like how much of that color is there? Think of it like a sponge. When it's oversaturated, there's a lot of it there. It's almost dripping, okay? And a lot of times when you increase the saturation in a photo too much, it does. The color almost looks like it's dripping and bleeding into each other, all right? Or you go the other way and you desaturate, and now you're back into grayscale. So those are all things that you can find within technology that we're using. So if you're looking at whether you're editing on a phone or a tablet or a computer, all these things that we've talked about are there. Now, if you're using traditional media, you're using chalk or pastels or colored pencils or markers or crayons, whatever it is that you're using, the color itself, whatever it is that you've picked, that's your hue. And then as you make it lighter or darker, you're adding value to it. And the saturation is usually going to be something that you see more with markers, pastels, but especially like watercolors. You can enrich those colors by either putting them on top of themselves, especially with watercolors and markers. When you go over it one time, you do your first wash, you put that color down the first time, it may not be that vibrant, especially with watercolors. But if you want to increase its saturation, you would add another layer of that same color to enhance it. So even in traditional media, we're still using these same ideas that we see so clearly labeled with all of these technological tools that we have. So right now, Mr. Dodson's learning to get into digital art. And most of my actual art that I make is traditional media. So I've got a little bit of a learning curve. But whether you consider yourself more of a digital artist or a traditional artist, depending on the things you like to work with, knowing the difference between hue and saturation and value, those three things are going to help you no matter which side you're working on. And when you're having to work in both, that gives you a better understanding because the ideas are still the same. Hey, maybe you don't actually want to make art. You just like working with artists or looking at art and appreciating it. All of these same ideas are giving you a stronger vocabulary to engage people with art. And I know a ton of people that work in design that are having to coordinate different elements and work with artists and work with other people that aren't into art at all. And to have that vocabulary to be able to work with everybody, you can talk to artists and then you can explain it to somebody else. It's possible to find a career where you work with art without having to be the person making the art. So while I've spent today talking a lot about vocabulary, I didn't teach you how to draw anything. We just talked about the ideas of understanding that hue is a color itself that you can then add value to by making it lighter or darker. And then you can saturate that color, making it so pure, or you can desaturate it and step it back into grayscale. All of those things are increasing your vocabulary so that you can better appreciate art or even understand your own art or somebody else's. Now, today was a little bit of a vocabulary lesson. There's a test after this. There's not. I'm messing with you. Okay? But I hope you took some time, enjoyed this, hopefully cleared some things up for you. And if anything, go out and play with it. If you've got a digital tool where you're working on making videos or editing photos on either a phone or a tablet or a computer, however you're editing those, go and play with these ideas. Find your different tools where you can scroll through and mess with the different slider bars and see how it changes your art. And then same thing if you're working with traditional media, what happens if you add more white to a color or you darken it? Or where can you add shading, or where can you give a different pop of color or add a different value to it? Or even desaturate it and start to work more with grayscale. These are all really big things that you have to wonder about. Maybe you work mostly with like just drawing with a pencil and you never add color to anything because you're worried you're going to mess it up. That's okay. That's part of getting messy and making mistakes, is you're going to mess up sometimes. And there's a great quote that says, mistakes are proof that you're trying. So get out there, try something new, have fun with it. And if you need some ideas, since today was so vocabulary intensive, check out one of the other videos on how to draw some of the things. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye.